Hello, and welcome to the Azure Virtual Desktop 2022 edition. So my name is Neil McLoughlin. I've been working in IT for over 20 years. I mostly work on virtual desktop infrastructures. So I used to be back into Citrix back in the day. I'm the co-founder of the AVD community. I'm co-founder of the UK AVD user group. I'm also a Microsoft MVP, and so I've been a Microsoft MVP in enterprise mobility since 2020. So I've come up to just my second or third year as Microsoft MVP now. You can follow me on Twitter at VirtualManc and also on WVD Community. My website is virtualmanc.co.uk. And I also run the Virtual Desktops.community website where we publish a newsletter every 2 weeks showing you the latest news about Azure Virtual Desktop. And that's my email address for my work and also my LinkedIn if you need that as well. Okay, so what are we going to discuss today? So we're going to give you a high-level overview of Azure Virtual Desktop, and then we're going to discuss some of the new features that we've had released in 2022. Okay, so it's been a pretty exciting year for Azure Virtual Desktop features. The service continues to get better and better and better all the time. So I'm very excited to talk about the new features that we have that really do and sort of enhance the user experience and the reasons why you choose Azure Virtual Desktop. So let's get into it. So we're going to talk about Azure AD Join, Multimedia Redirection, RDP Show Path, Azure KCI, Trusted Launch, Microsoft Teams. So it's a lot to discuss. Okay, so I guess first of all we'll talk about what is Azure Virtual Desktop for those people who haven't really seen it before. So Azure Virtual Desktop is a service provider by Microsoft. Okay, so the core of it is the control plane. Okay, so that consists of all the web access, the gateway, the broker, the diagnostics, all the REST API information. So if you think about a kind of historical VDI platform that you may deployed like 5 years ago, you would deployed lots of servers, right? So, for example, from Citrix, we would have had to deploy brokers, storefront servers, NetScaler devices, and the same for sort of RDSH as well. So we'd have to deploy sort of RDSS session host using Windows Server. We'd have to deploy firewall rules and gateways and all that stuff. With Azure Virtual Desktop, we don't need to do that, okay? Because Microsoft are essentially doing all stuff for you. They maintaining that, so you don't have to. So the only things which you control is the stuff inside the Azure subscription. Okay, so on the diagram as you can see, so the networking, all the VNets, you need to sort of create those. All the resource groups within your Azure subscription, you create those. And then you actually have to create the compute. Okay, so we need to create all the virtual machines, which contains all the network cards. So you have compute, network cards, and storage. So they're all like the virtual hard disk for the virtual machines as well. And we also have Azure Files. And that's normally used to run the profiles. So we use FSLogix for Azure Virtual Desktop. So, and then obviously you get the endpoint and client devices where the users connect to the desktops from. Okay, so they're either thin clients or your current Windows operating system. And then also we have the authentication. Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk about a bit early in the slides coming on. We can now deploy sort of Azure AD Join, which means that technically, coming soon, we shouldn't need to have domain controllers because we're using Azure AD. But as it is today, you have to deploy a domain controller, or you can use Azure Active Directory Domain Services, and that will actually maintain that for you. But most customers that we speak to generally just build a domain controller within their own environment, and then they will sync it to their existing domain. So you got a domain authentication actually within your Azure subscription. So that's a sort of very high level overview of what the AVD service is. Okay, so on to our first feature. As we just talked about, Azure AD Join for Azure Virtual Desktop, and that has now gone GA. Okay, so this is a really nice feature. And what this basically means is we can have our session hosts and we can join them to Azure AD. Okay, and what this unlocks is single session sign-on, SSO. Okay, so as it is today, when I deploy a session host, if I want to join it to my domain, you'll get authenticated twice, because authentication point number one is I'm authenticating against the Azure Active Directory, okay? And the second authentication point is I'm authenticating against the actual session host, okay? So what domain joining or session hoster Azure AD is going to do, it's going to enable that single sign-on capability, okay? Because if my workstation is part of Azure AD, your user account is what gives you access to the Azure Virtual Desktop Service, and those session hosts are also part of Azure AD, then it can just pass straight through, okay, without having to authenticate. So really, really cool technology. It's just gone sort of GA, I believe, so we can test it out, play with it. So it's for single session and also multi-session hosts as well. Okay, so what do you need to use this? So obviously we need to run Windows 10 to 004 or later. Most people should be running the latest version, at least kind of 20 sort of H1 or H2 now. The user needs to be part of the virtual machine user login role, because they need it to gain access to that VM. And if you need to have local admin users, because remember we're not part of a domain, right? So we don't have like domain admins. So if you have local administrator rights on that machine, there's a role. It's called the virtual machine administrator login role. Okay, so anyone who needs local admin access needs to be part of that. And then we also need to set a custom RDP setting, which must be set to target is AAD joined I. Okay, and that will ensure that when we connect to that desktop, we'll connect successfully. You only actually need that if you're connecting via a non-Windows device and also via the web console as well. Okay, so how do we create it? How do we enable this? So basically all you have to do is when you domain join your session host, you just need to select the Azure Active Directory option. Okay, and as you can see from the screenshot there, we can also enroll it with Intune at the same time as well. So obviously this means because it's Azure Active Directory and obviously Intune integrates with Azure Active Directory, when we create those session hosts, we can also join them to Intune or enroll them with Intune. And that's the way most companies are going to manage those devices, right? Because if you think about it, again, if we take Active Directory away from the party, we don't have group policy anymore. Okay, so how are you going to manage those devices? So that's going to be a sort of Microsoft Endpoint Manager / Intune capability that you can use to manage those devices, manage user settings, manage computer settings, deploy software, all that stuff's going to be done via Intune. What about your profiles? So obviously, when the Azure AD join capability was first released, FSOtic wasn't supported because you didn't have a storage account which was capable of joining Azure AD. Okay, so you had to have it for non sort of FSOtic users only, which is quite limiting because most people use FSOtic. So Microsoft have now actually have the capability to Azure AD join the storage accounts as well. Okay, so when you're creating your profiles, you need to obviously create a storage account which is Azure AD joined. Okay, because obviously our session host is going to be Azure AD joined, so our storage account needs to be Azure AD joined as well. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So this is from Nerdio perspective. So we just select our Azure AD. Some magic happens behind the scenes to enable this capability. Okay, and it's also worth noting as well is that Azure Active Directory Domain Services is not supported for this feature as well, because we can actually do, when it comes to sort of Azure AD, we can do two things. We can do Azure AD join and we can do hybrid AD join, right? So Azure AD join is only when you're just using pure Azure AD. Azure hybrid join is when you actually using Active Directory to do the domain join, but we're registering the host against Azure AD, which means we can also use sort of MEM and Intune to manage those devices. Okay, and really important as well, your user account must be in hybrid, and what that means is it must be synced from Azure AD Connect. Okay, so I can't go in and I can't create a brand new user in Azure AD. I have to create that user within Active Directory and then sync it by using the Azure AD Connect into Azure AD. Okay, that will be lifted in the future, but for now, the user source has to be from Active Directory. Okay, so what we actually have to do as well, we have to create a service principal or an AD application within Azure AD. So at the moment, this is done by PowerShell. You have to disable MFA to do it. And then this allows the Kerberos authentication to happen. So there's something going on the back end for that to happen. Okay. And then on the hosts, we need to set registry setting. So it's the Cloud Kerberos ticket retrieval enabled setting. And that will basically enable everything to work properly. So again, that gets set on the session hosts. Okay. Okay, so next one is multimedia redirection. So for those who come from a sort of Citrix or VMware world, they'll know about this feature very well. So now have this within Azure Virtual Desktop. And what this basically does, it redirects any sort of media that you are accessing on your Azure Virtual Desktop session and it locally. Okay, so for example, if I'm got a website which I'm accessing using Microsoft Edge and that's got sort of Flash content on it or YouTube videos or whatever, it's actually going to use my local resource to access that website. So that means that we're not using the resources on the session host to publish that. So think about how much when you open a video on a session host, you're not using redirection, it eats up quite a lot of CPU, easily like 25, 30%, sometimes 40 to 50%. So if you can imagine you have a few users doing that and they're watching BBC News at lunchtime or something, it could easily kill a host. Just a few people just watching video content. Okay. So again, this is a public preview. It's not fully supported, and it's only supported on a few sites, which we'll go through shortly. And it also needs the least remote desktop client version 1.2.2999. Again, I hope for people who are using a much later version than that. Okay, and it also needs to be the insider version. So the insider version of the remote desktop client is one which they push out first to test features, so you'll get it a bit quicker. So you need to be running the inside version to use this capability. Okay, so what does it look like? So when you deploy it, you install a plugin on your session host and also your local VM, local machine as well. Okay, so when you do that, you'll get this thing pop up saying the Microsoft Multimedia Redirection extension. So if you have sort of Edge or Chrome, you need to install it in both of those if you're using both. And then you'll see the client version. Then you can just enable disable the extension as well. You can actually manage it by group policy if you want to. Okay, so let's see what this actually looks like, shall we? Or before that, we'll have a look and see if. So now we're going to do a video, and that video is basically going to show the difference that you get with optimized. Okay. So if you look at the CPU usage, it'll come back up again in a second. Okay, so at the moment I'm running around 13% CPU usage. And we can see the bandwidth, so we're using some UDP to connect to that desktop as well. We'll go over that shortly. RDP Show Path. So as you can see, the CPU usage is pretty low. It's running like 6% CPU usage. So you can imagine if I have 10 people on that host all streaming that video, that will be perfectly okay. Okay. So let's have a look at the usage if you're not using it. Okay. So this is a unoptimized version. Okay, so let's have a look at the CPU usage now. So we should see it go up. Or is this the optimized? No, I think this is the unoptimized. No, this is the optimized one because I can see the CPU usage is still at like 7%. Okay, so you skipped that video for some reason, but if you were looking at the unoptimized version, it'll be using like 25% CPU. So as you can see, the user experience is very, very good. Okay, so next up we have RDP Show Path for public networks. Okay. This for me is one of my favorite features, purely because of what it unlocks, right, from a user experience perspective. So it's actually in public preview currently, but it's going GA on the 6th of September. Okay, so essentially at the moment, if you don't use RDP Short Path, you're using a TCP connection. Okay, so TCP connection is what's used to connect to what they call the Azure Front Door Service. So all the communication basically flows through the Azure Virtual Desktop Gateway. Okay, and that's all done via TCP protocol. So again, those from a Citrix backgrounds will know that you could enable UDP, and when you did that, it just provided a better user experience for VDI. So we've now got that capability within Azure Virtual Desktop. Okay, and what that means is we get a much better user experience. Mostly because the traffic is going directly between the client and the session host. Okay, not having to traverse those gateways or the Azure front door. My connection is straight between the client and the session host using UDP. Okay, so we get much better performance. It's going to be enabled by default out of the box when it goes GA, but for now we have to add this registry setting, which will enable the capability. And what difference does it make? So as you can see, this is my testing that I did personally on my desktops. So exactly the same session host, one's with, one's without. So the one on the left is with, the one on the right is without. So as you can see, the remote desktop display mode is the same, but look at the bandwidth difference that we've got there. Okay, with it enabled, I've got 298 megabits a second bandwidth. Without it enabled, I've only got 50 because my network traffic is going all the way through the Azure Front Door Service, through the Azure Virtual Desktop Gateway, and then coming back again. Okay, so we're using TCP Reverse Connect, whereas optimized we're using UDP. Okay, round trip latency is halved. Okay, with the service enabled, 14 milliseconds because I've just got that connection from my local host to the session host. And then with it, without it enabled, it's got 32 milliseconds because again, it's going through all the gateways. So you can see there when I've highlighted it in yellow to the left, it's saying remote desktop session, remote desktop gateway name not in use because that direct connection. Okay. And what does it look like from a network sort of perspective? So this is a quick diagram that I took off the Microsoft website. So as you can see, with RDP Short Path that was mentioned before, so the client session host has that direct connection. Without it, we're having obviously traversed the Azure Virtual Desktop infrastructure. So the RDP broker, the RD web, the RD gateway, the public internet, we're all going through that connection. So it's a much more complicated connection. Firewalls, everything. So it just makes it a lot better if you're using RDP Short Path. Okay, the next one is Azure Stack ACI. Again, this is a really cool one. So this basically enables us to use Azure Virtual Desktop on-prem, right? So at the moment, obviously Azure Virtual Desktop is limited only to Azure. Okay, so if I've got a workload which I need to run locally, I can't do that. So Azure Stack ACI enables us to run that locally. So if you've got any applications which are really low latency, or they need really fast performance, or they need to be close to your sort of on-prem infrastructure, this is what you use for that. There are some stuff which you need to pay for. So obviously you need to buy the kit. Okay, so there is Azure Stack ACI validated hardware that you have to purchase. So that could cost, I don't know, tens of thousands of pounds maybe, or up to hundreds of thousands of pounds, or maybe even millions if you've got a lot of them. And then we've got our monthly cost that we have to pay. Okay, so we have to pay infrastructure cost. So that's £9 per physical core. Or if you're running like a 16-core processor VM, that's going to cost you £144 a month. Okay, so this is the per physical Azure ACI host that you have to have. And then we already have to have our user rights for AVD, which we've already got if we use our 365 licensing. And then we also have to pay a Azure Virtual Desktop Hybrid Service fee. Okay, and that's going to be a per active vCPU of the session hosts. Okay, so it's not going to be a cheap solution, but these pricings are only still being discussed, so these could change. So don't take these as a pinch of salt. There may be more, there may be less, but it's going to be around this area. And the problem that I've seen so far with it is we need to manage it separately as well. As in, you need to use like IPv or SCVMM to manage their hosts because they're physical hosts running Hyper-V essentially. Okay. Eventually, Microsoft will enable you to manage via the Azure portal, but for now, you can use Nerdio to manage those. Okay, and then we can do all the image management, sort of host provisioning, all that stuff via the Nerdio console. So you don't need to use a separate tool to manage it. Okay, so what are the benefits of Azure HCI? So obviously cloud-based VDI on-prem, right? So you don't need to manage all those extra servers. This Azure manages it all for you. The Windows 10/11 multi-session, you can run that on-prem. Again, previously that was only Azure, but now we can run it on-prem on our Azure HCI hosts. Performance, so if you're using RDP Show Path, for example, you're going to have sub-milliseconds latency access between the user and the desktop. Okay, so if I'm in a corporate environment, I've got my sort of gigabit backbone network going on, then we're going to have like less than 1 milliseconds latency between the client and the host. Obviously, in my demo before, you saw even if I go to UK South, I've still got that 13 millisecond latency, which doesn't really matter in the normal day-to-day, but if you've got a sort of application which needs that access or needs that performance, then it will make a big difference. And of course, control as well. So this is one of the big things. A lot of companies don't want to put all their data within Azure. Okay, either they have data sovereignty issues or they have some critical data that just can't go into the cloud. Using this solution, we can keep everything on-prem, but still have the capability to use Azure Virtual Desktop. Okay, management plane as well. So we discussed we can use Nerdio to manage that for you if you want to. So it's a really cool solution. We're going to see it's only in public preview at the moment. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of uptake there is for Azure HCI. So what's that look like from a Nerdio perspective? So we basically just configure it. So we have to have our sort of HCI cluster. So we basically run it based on Azure Arc, right? So you register your Azure HCI host with your Azure Active Directory environment, like with your Azure AD, and also your Azure subscription. And then from there, we can create an automation account within Nerdio, and that does all the functionality, as in copying the images down, creating the host, that kind of thing. And this is what it actually looks like within the Nerdio console. So it looks just like any other Azure Virtual Desktop host. So I can do my normal day-to-day tasks, as in create hosts, power host off, delete hosts, and a bit soon we're going to be bringing the capability for power management as well. We can also be able to do hopefully burst capability, where we can burst from on-prem into Azure and vice versa. Okay, so that's coming soon. And that's what it looks like within the Azure console as well. Obviously, this one's disconnected because it's just a demo environment, but this is what you'll see. So you'll see your session host within here, how much memory they've got, and this is where you basically connect it to Azure, okay, to let Azure know that you've got these hosts. So one of the biggest things is the image management. So today, if you weren't using Nerdio, for example, you'd have to manage those images separately, as in create those images on the hosts themselves and then maybe sysprep them or snapshot them. We can actually deploy our images from Nerdio. So we create them as we were, and then we basically just sync them down to the session host, and then it just gives the image path. And then from that, we can create, if VMs from that image. Okay, so we just have one image. That image is used within the Azure platform and also the Azure HCI platform as well. So we don't need to duplicate sort of any images. Okay, so the next one is Intune support for device configuration for multi-session. Okay, so Intune's quite an interesting one. We've definitely seen the rise of managing Azure Virtual Desktop using Intune. As I said, as we see people progress to deploying Azure AD, domain join, Intune is going to be the tool of choice to manage those hosts. Okay, so we need Windows 10, 19, and 3 and later. We need a version of the AVD agent. This is the latest version, which should happen naturally anyway. I know we need either our host to be hybrid joined, okay, or Azure AD joined, as we discussed not long ago. Okay, and again, Azure Active Directory, and I can never say that word. Azure Active Directory Domain Services is not supported for this. Okay, so once you've got that, you need to set a configuration policy setting, which is the enable MDM enrollment using the default Azure AD credentials, and set that to device. Okay, because we're doing this on a per host session basis, not user. Okay, anything we're doing here, we're pushing to the host, not the user. Users is not supported. User settings for Intune is not supported for Azure Virtual Desktop yet. Again, hopefully it will come down the road. But as it is today, you have to have everything provisioned in the system context, essentially. So pushed out to your hosts, not user settings. Okay. So again, we can set group policy. So use that setting, which I just showed you, to configure the device credentials. Or if you want to, you can configure it using Config Manager in Code Management Mode. Or if you're just using pure Azure AD join, you just tick enroll with VM, and then when the host is created, it automatically enrolls with Intune as well. Okay. As you can see within the portal, Intune portal, we're getting a new setting, and that setting is the enterprise multi-session. Right. So we create that profile within Intune, and that's what we can then use to target our multi-session host with Azure Virtual Desktop. Okay, and that's what that looks like. Okay, and here's just a quick example of what we can do with this. So this is a piece of software that I pushed out, Putty. So we just pushed it out from Intune onto our Azure Virtual Desktop session hosts. So we can either push this out to the images, or we can push it out to the session host. So when the host gets built, that software automatically gets deployed. But most people don't like doing it that way. And the reason why is because it takes a bit of time. It can be only like 30 minutes. It could be longer. It could be shorter. But most people prefer to install stuff into their image rather than having to wait for the host, or because you could get to a stage where you've got hosts which are in an inconsistent state. For example, if there's an issue with one of the hosts and you didn't get the software, if I'm a user, I log onto that host, I'm expecting to see Putty there, but it won't be there. Okay, so for single session hosts, works great. I'd say, yeah, definitely use this. But for multi-session hosts, I'd say it's better sticking to image management if you can. But if you're okay with sometimes software not being there, or it may take a bit of time to get there, then you can still absolutely use this feature. Okay, so Intune support for user policy settings. So as we just discussed, we can use this, but we can only use it for single session hosts, not multi-session hosts. Okay. And we can now use it for user scope policy settings, use certificate by templates, or PowerShell scripts. So you need to be a minimum Windows 11 that you need to be running, and there's a certain KB that you have to have installed. I think that pretty sure that KB comes under updates anyway, so you should have that installed, but check. And I said this will enable to use user session policies when you're logging onto Azure Virtual Desktop with a single session host only. Not supported on multi-session hosts for the obvious reason. Okay, so again, single session host only. The next one is Trusted Launch support for Azure Virtual Desktop. This is a really good security feature. So as you know, so within Windows 11, and this is enabled by default for a physical machine. Obviously, you get secure boot and sort of TPM chips. We can now do this within Azure Virtual Desktop. Okay, that basically just locks the machines down. So it enables you need to have Gen 2 VMs, which have like a UEFI BIOS, and this basically just protects the operating system. Okay, so if it detects that someone's messing with the DLL files or someone's injected something into the boot chain, then it's going to see this, and then it'll basically stop it from happening. Okay. It's only supported on certain VM sizes, so check your VM size if you want to use this to make sure the one that you're running supports it. It needs to be sort of Gen 2, and also you need to be running Windows 11 for this as well. Okay. So if you have the following features, as in Azure Site Recovery, shared disks, altered disks, managed images, dedicated hosts, or netted virtualization, it's not supported. Okay, so make sure that you're not running any of those. And we can also provision via the custom images as well. So when it first released, you can only provision it from the Azure Marketplace. So you couldn't, like, if you had your own custom corporate image, you couldn't use it. We can now. So that feature was released recently as well. And if it's all set up and working correctly, this is what you see. So if you go to system information, you'll see the platform on desktop, secure boot state equals on. Okay, that's the key setting there. So if you're testing this out, that's the setting that you need to be looking for to Microsoft Teams. So who doesn't use Teams, right? So when we first started the pandemic and when sort of rolling out Azure Virtual Desktop to lots of hosts, it was quite common practice for people to use Teams outside of their AVD session because the experience inside the AVD session was pretty bad. There was no optimization. It used up lots of CPU and GPU and memory. But now we've actually got lots of improvements in that space. So I say it's now on par with the Citrix version. So there's a lot of new features which have been released over the past kind of 12 months to improve that user experience. So as well as also obviously the optimization that you get where it offloads all the optimization to your local webcam, for example. We've got these new features, so Teams background effects. So apparently this is one of the most requested features that Microsoft got. So this is now available on Azure Virtual Desktop. Multi-window support, so you can pop out different windows. Call me feature, so you can follow around your Teams call. So if you drop on from, I know you on your AVD session host, you have to take your kid out to the doctors or something, you can now transfer that session onto your phone, for example, or vice versa. Secondary ringer is now supported, so you can set your secondary ringer to another device. And we can also have live captions available. So feature set massively improved, user experience massively improved. So if you've got a bit of blood with sort of Teams and Azure Virtual Desktop, you should definitely revisit that because it has got a lot better. And that's just what you see on your local session host. So as you can see, what you're actually looking at here is my local PC. And you'll see that Teams has actually been offloaded onto that. So this is me doing a Teams call. You can see like using my network, is using my GPU. And so those resources aren't on the actual session host themselves. And they're just being used by my local GPU and my local CPU as well. Okay. macOS support. So obviously there's quite a few Mac users out there. Previously they didn't have the Teams optimization, but now that's in public preview. And so that's just a tick box in the settings. So you need the minimum version remote desktop client for the Mac, which is 10.7.7. Obviously it's probably a later one by now. Then you just enable it, go into the preferences general, then tick that box, and then hopefully you'll get a much better user experience. Background effects is not supported yet. Hopefully it will be in the future, and the same for give and take control as well. Schedule agent updates. So this is quite an important feature. I've personally seen the effects of this on quite a few customers. So the AVD agent itself seems to be randomly updated at random intervals, right? And the problem being is it can do it in the middle of the working day or it can do it on the logon storm in the morning. Now, most of the time, it doesn't affect the end users. But if there's a problem with the agent upgrade, or if it's one that requires a reboot, or if it happens to be updating when you've got lots of people logging onto the host, it can cause a problem. So what Microsoft have released is a scheduled agent update feature, and then we can actually specify the time windows that we want to have our hosts update themselves. Okay, so we can set up to 2 time windows, 2 maintenance windows. The host has to be online for them. Okay, so if it's not online, then it will just update them when it next comes online if it misses those maintenance windows. Okay, so really useful feature, but try to make sure that you're in that time window when the host is going to be turned on, especially if you're using power management. But this just gives us a bit more control when those hosts are updated, because as I said, it can cause problems when if an agent is updating while you got users logged onto the host. We've seen it where they get booted off a host, or the host will be rebooted, or something. So most of the time it's okay, but in larger environments it can be a real pain. New metadata regions. So I'll give you a guess where these two are. So obviously one of them's in Japan, and one of them's in Australia. Okay, so if you're not aware, the metadata is essentially what consists of all your configuration data for your Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. Okay, I believe it's a SQL database, and it contains the basic data, but it contains user information, which is why some people are still unable to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop until the metadata is in their own region, right? Because that data needs to be kept within that region. It doesn't affect performance that much because it's just configuration data, but it may help a little bit. But as far as I'm aware, it doesn't make any difference. But it may also be better for high availability and redundancy as well. Okay, so if my metadata's, if I'm in Australia, for example, and my metadata is in US and the US goes down, I can't access my Azure Virtual Desktop. Okay, so this graph that you're seeing is basically it's an updated graph showing all the gateways. Quite a few, right? And all these sort of different metadata locations as well that we've got, and we've got coming in the future as well. So pretty impressive, the amount of sort of the network that we've got for Azure Virtual Desktop, the amount of locations that we can go into now. It seems to be pretty much every single region out there has a metadata location, which is really cool to see. AVD Autoscale. So this is a much missed feature. So this capability means that you can enable auto-scaling for your Azure Virtual Desktop host pools via the Azure portal. All right, so you could do this previously using scale sets or any Azure automation that you had to do manually, or a service like Nerdio, but this enables you to sort of create a really simple auto-scaling plan in the Azure console. It is quite limited in what it does, so we'll discuss that in a second. And at the moment, it's limited to the following regions only, so you can see those. So not every region it's there for, but I believe it'll be out to all the regions eventually. But we can create a schedule. So we can, I think it's 3 schedules by default. Ramp up, peak hours, and then ramp down. Okay. So we can set the days that we set that schedule for, and then we set the time. Okay, so the minimum percentage number is the minimum number of hosts that we want to be available in that current phase. So at the moment, obviously, we've got ramp up. So that's going to, 8 o'clock in the morning, that's going to have 20% of hosts available. And then the capacity threshold is the percentage of available hosts that is going to need until another scaling action takes place, as in turn on another host. Okay. And then we can set our peak hours as well. So obviously at 9 o'clock, we're going to have 60% of hosts available. And then ramp down is basically going to start ramping hosts down as well at 6 p.m. Okay, so it's quite basic. It's just on it's just on a threshold of VMs, essentially, the amount of VMs available. And you can set a session notification message for the users as well. Next one is SSO and Passwordless Authentication. Excuse me. For Azure Virtual Desktop. So this is released within the past week. Very exciting feature. So this is all built on the Azure AD Join capability that we just mentioned. And what this will enable you to do is two things. So number one, it enables you to use a Windows Hello for authentication. All right. So if I've got like a FIDO2 key, which I have one here actually, I've not tested it yet, but I hope it's fun time soon. So I've got these. I can use one of these as my authentication device. Okay. So I don't need to use any passwords. It's passwordless. Right. Second one is single sign-on capability. So if my host is joined to Active Directory or Azure AD, I'm connecting from a host which is also a part of that. My credentials can be automatically passed through, and then you can get that single sign-on capability. Okay. At this time, it's only available in Windows 11, 22H2 inside the build. Okay, so you can find that within the Azure gallery if you want to test out this capability. And you also need to enable a Kerberos server object within your Active Directory environment if you're using hybrid AD join. And then you need to create a customized RDP property as well, which is enable RDS ADDS off. You can't say it, but you'll see it there. Okay, and that's the setting which you need to enable against the host pool, which you want to use this for. So dead simple to enable and gives you really, really cool user experience because people can log on without having to re-enter their password twice, essentially. So much, much, much better user experience.